So it's my pleasurable role to introduce our two conversants tonight, and also to let you know that the structure of the evening is that we're going to have the conversation for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open the floor to questions and conversation for the next 30 minutes. So I'm going to start with Dr. Max Price. He has a medical degree from Wits University, a PPE from Oxford, an MSc in Community Health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and a diploma in Occupational Health from Wits University. Early in his career, he worked in both academic and rural hospitals. He served as the Dean of Health Sciences at Wits and as the Vice-Chancellor of UCT from 2008 to 2018. He now advises in public health, higher education, and strategic leadership. He's also a saxophone player, an opera buff, a jazz lover, a half-marathon runner, and a dedicated family man. And then Professor Mosa Moshabela also has a medical degree from UKZN, an HIV diploma, a master's in family medicine, an MSc in demography and health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and a PhD. He has worked as a medical doctor, a clinical project manager, and as an academic. He has served as Dean and Head of School of Nursing and Public Health, and then as Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Innovation at UKZN. And he is currently Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Cape Town. He is also a runner, road running preferred, but treadmill will do. He enjoys traveling, cricket, rugby, soccer, athletics, as well as jazz, and more jazz. His favorite drink is water, plain, still water. So with that, over to you, Professor Moshabela, to start the conversation.
Thank you very much. I think
we should just talk about jazz.
Yeah, that's what we should talk about. Not medicine, please. Okay. It's fine. We can do this. No problem. We can improvise. So thank you, Prof. Alison, and thank you, Sarah. And I want to thank Mehdi and the team that have organized this event. A lot has gone into it. Trying to find Max where he is and trying to bring him here is not an easy thing to do. But somehow we have managed to do that. For me, I think it's been so wonderful arriving at UCT. The warm reception that I have heard, it's the thing that keeps me going, the goodwill that I've received. My job is tough. It's busy. I run around all day long. And then when I thought the day is done, I get these daily mails where I have to respond to all sorts of things, and signatures to do and so forth. But the support that I've been receiving in the time that I've been here, it's really been incredible. And I'm very grateful for that. It makes things so much better. The environment here at UCT is very complex. There's a lot of nuance. I learn every day about UCT. Very diverse. They keep telling me about the devolved structure, devolution. We talk a lot about academic freedom. We talk a lot about stakeholders, a lot of donors, a lot of alumni. So my day is filled with all sorts of engagements with a whole range of stakeholders. And so it is that complexity that I find very challenging, but at the same time also very enriching. And it is very characteristic of this environment, of this institution. Now, There is complexity in other universities where I've been, but I don't know what you people have done to UCT. It's at another level, on steroids. But at the same time, I think that it's wonderful to come into a place and feel like you can make a difference. It's not nice to go to a place and work and feel like you're not needed. Things can run without you. But I've come into UCT and people are appreciating some of the thinking, the values that I've been engaging on, and just the spirit of bringing people together, uniting the institution. People are very appreciative of that, and in some ways I would have thought that these are basics, but I think I recognize that UCT has been through a rough time. And part of trying to understand that is that I've been engaging with a lot of the previous leaders of UCT. I have had to do lunch with former vice-chancellors, former executives. Even today I chaired a meeting with the College of Fellows, engaging on some of these nuances, challenges. We're planning to have a meeting with some of the former deans. So the process of engaging with the custodians of the legacy of UCT is important for me because it helps me understand how we arrived where we are today. So it becomes necessary to do that in order to take an institution forward. There's a foundation that is there, that has been laid. We're not just building on top of nothing. We're building on top of a foundation to take the institution in the future, which is also why I found this conversation necessary. Of course, Max has taken the time because he had nothing to do and he was bored and he decided to write a book. He decided to write a book, and then of course I had to read the book. But also doing that kind of helped me a lot to understand, to have some sort of insight into some of the difficulties of having to make decisions and lead an institution that is complex, especially because just as UCT, but also just in higher education sector, we have entered this sort of palpable, volatile state. And it creates a lot of uncertainty, it creates a lot of complexity, and we have to navigate all of that. And I often say to my colleagues that my job is to take this university into the future. We have received a wonderful institution that has been handed to us as a legacy by people who made decisions 30 years ago. 30 years ago, people were sitting in the same boardrooms that we are sitting today, thinking about the challenges that they were facing, thinking about decisions that they need to make that are going to have an impact on today. The same institutions that we have inherited, people had to guide it back then. And I remind my colleagues that sustainability of the institution means that we have to think about the kind of institution that we are going to hand over to the next generation. 30 years from now, we're going to have a new generation of leaders that will be sitting in the same rooms we are sitting in, having to make tough decisions. They need to have a strong institution that is able to meet their needs at that time. And the kind of institution they are going to have is going to depend on what we do today. So it's in that spirit that I think we do have to have this intergenerational exchange so that we can share lessons, share ideas, and begin to think about how we can also help the next generation to benefit from the same benefits we are enjoying today. So Max, welcome to the hot seat. I'm sure you thought it was over, you're retired, you don't have to deal with this anymore. But I do want you to share with us because as I said, when I arrived here and I thought that this environment is complex, and then I went back when I got to read your book, and then I realized that some of the things you're talking about, these are some of the things that I'm faced with today. I arrive in an environment where there's just, there's a lot of nuance and complexity, and at times what feels like tension and polarization, fragmentation. And below it all, it is this diversity that forms UCT. And there are many constituencies in the institution, all of them with their interests. And all of them want to make sure that their interests are catered for. And now I have a job of having to unite all those constituencies. My theory is, if you want to maintain the excellence that is UCT, you cannot do it in a divided community. You cannot do it in a divided house. You need to make sure that there is unity in the institution, there is trust, there is collegiality, but it's not easy when there is this level of diversity, which in general, in theory, we say diversity is meant to be a strength, not a weakness. But sometimes I'm not sure if what I'm faced with is an asset or a problem. So I would like to believe, and I would like to turn it into an asset. And I would like you to just respond to that and share with us your views on that. You've led this institution for 10 years. What is your view in how UCT is just so diverse, and that diversity in some instances represents a whole range of interests that are not easy to cater for?
I don't know if I need a mic or if my mic
you.
is working. Is it working okay? Thanks. Well, first, thanks to organizers Sarah, Alison, thank you for moderating this and for inviting me to come and talk and to be in conversation with you. I think the way I would try to answer, I'll try to answer your question, and both to illustrate the problem you face and to try to answer it, is by drawing on some of the stories or some of the events of my term to illustrate this, because I think that perhaps the overriding challenge for a vice-chancellor of a university, any university, but this university certainly exemplifies that. The overriding challenge is to manage the tension that that I think you're describing, the tension between, on the one hand, recognizing that a university is a place that is argumentative by definition and should be argumentative, where there are many stakeholders, you listed some of them, the alumni, the students, the staff, the parents, the donors, the government, of course, that calls us to task all the time, many stakeholders. But within each of those stakeholder groups, such as the students, very different values, different cultures, different opinions, different interests. And those are strengths, I believe, of a university. Those arguments, those different views that we bounce against each other and that eventually help shape new ideas and rethink the world through a new frame, those are, in a way, the essence of what we do. So we need that and we want that. So on the one hand, you have this diversity of stakeholders and values and views. And then on the other hand, you are leading an organization and something that is organic, and that these centrifugal forces that are pulling it apart could destroy it if you can't find ways of also creating some social cohesion and particularly a sense of inclusiveness. And in a way, the Rhodes Must Fall protest, the Rhodes Must Fall protests were the tipping point after a couple of decades of increasing the scale, the size of the number of, in particular, black students and black staff, but students from a whole, with different values and different cultures and different interests, and it reached a critical mass at around 2015, when you could no longer simply think that this was a cohesive organization and inclusive, because it wasn't. And there was a large enough voice to say, we don't feel part of this organization. We feel like we're othered. We feel like we're second-class citizens. We feel like we don't belong. You mock our accents. You don't take seriously our interest in different menus in the residences. You don't think about at all whether the artworks might offend us. There's all sorts of things in the culture which were alienating. And so...
But those things were also, in a way, the heritage.
That's right. So that's what I'm saying. This is
the institution.
This is the tension. And perhaps I'll pick out some of the examples to illustrate that. But the job, I think, of a Vice-Chancellor everywhere is to manage this tension between these different and often conflicting and contradictory views.
He's not answering my question.
And
you realize that he's not answering my question. Max, yeah.
He's listening now.
Max, how does a Vice-Chancellor do that?
Yes. So, I'll give you...
He's telling me that's his job of a Vice-Chancellor. I get that.
I'll give you... I'm just rephrasing it so that the audience can understand it.
They get it. They get it too.
I'm making it a question that I can answer.
And I can see. That's the job of the Vice-Chancellor, to avoid the question.
So let me take the first one example, which was the process of the protest around Rhodes Must Fall and the process of taking down the statue. The students, when the protests broke, took the fallists, the Rhodes Must Fall protagonists, the champions, argued that the statue must come down immediately, that it was not a question of the council having the right to make that decision or the Senate having the right to make that decision, that the students felt offended by it, or a group of students felt offended by it, and simply because they felt that in order to be an inclusive university, we should not have statues of our oppressors brooding over the campus.
Sure.
For that reason, it should be removed. And it linked into a particular strand of identity politics, which said, this is my experience. You have a different experience. You, Vice-Chancellor, have a different experience. You're not in a position to say how I should feel or not feel about this.
Yes.
Therefore, there's nothing to discuss. The statue should come down. And for me, so there's one view. And then for me, I recognized immediately, and we had surveys about this, that there were a wide diversity of views about the statue and whether it should come down or not. not necessarily aligned either with race or with politics. So the president, Zuma at the time, and the Constitutional Court Judge Albie Sachs, called me and said, do not take the statue down. That is airbrushing history. South Africa has a policy on statues, which is that just like the statue outside Parliament, it remains up. We respect multiple heritages, and they should be preserved. So it wasn't as if this was one political party or one political strand against another. Even within the political parties and groups, there were very diverse views. My approach was, or our executive's approach was, we needed to use this as an opportunity to have a discussion, to see whether we could find common ground and to see whether we could find even ideally consensus, but at least a sufficient majority. For that to happen, the first thing we had to do was to stop the statue from being pulled down. And in many parts of the world, which has happened after Rhodes Must Fall, I mean, the movement kind of started here, but statues all over the world at universities and elsewhere have come down since then. And very often they've been pulled down by a mob, like the Bristol statue of Edward Colston dumped in the Bristol Canal. He was a slave trader who endowed Bristol University with his profits from slave trading. But that style of that approach, for me, does not belong in a university, and we needed to avoid that. And we needed to have 24/7 guards on the statue. We needed to box it to a certain extent. But we took it through a process where we asked each constituency, the past forum.
But that could have been seen as protecting coloniality.
It was for a while, but the point was it was also to protect a process of discussion. And eventually in the Senate meeting, the Senate, I believe, and I'm sure most senators would agree, that at the start of the meeting, one didn't know which way the Senate vote would go. But as a result of the discussion, as a result of giving the four lists a platform there, and others, the Senate was almost unanimous in supporting the view that the statue should come down. And the same thing happened in council. To start with, council was very divided, but it was persuaded. And in the end of that month, when the statue did come down, I believe we changed the views of the vast majority of the community, and we created a sufficient consensus. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a way of dealing with that tension. If I take another example.
Okay, before you take another example. So what you're saying is that a Vice-Chancellor must establish consensus if you've got a diverse community. And even though some people will say, actually, this is urgent. I mean, it could be argued that the students were right that it should be taken down. If one is looking at it in hindsight, eventually it was taken down. And maybe you could have just taken it down immediately.
Could have, yeah.
And
I came out in the first few days saying I think the statue should also come down. It wasn't that.
Then why did you go through this whole process then?
For precisely
formality.
For precisely the reason you're asking, which is that the job of Vice Chancellor isn't to respond to one particular constituency in the university, and certainly not with our proper consultation. The job of the Vice Chancellor is to see whether you can bring people along with you. And one of the ways of doing that is by consulting. One is by exposing everyone to the debate. Social media was also important in this process because it exposed people to views about Rhodes, for example, and about the history they didn't know before. And that changed their views.
But then, like I said, UCT, very diverse, many, many, many interests. You know, in some places you could say, okay, maybe there are like 3 constituencies that you have to deal with. UCT, you have to deal with 12.
Yeah.
And you have to reach consensus with everybody.
You don't have to reach consensus, I would say a sufficient consensus. Sometimes you don't get it. So for example, the alumni, there was an electronic vote by alumni. Alumni could send in, from all over the world,
sure,
could send views. The alumni was not persuaded. The 70-80% of alumni emails that came in argued against removing the statue.
So you didn't listen to the alumni?
So you have to make a decision, and if you have to make a decision which isn't going to please everyone, you can't listen to everyone.
You didn't listen to the alumni?
They didn't. I would say the alumni didn't listen to the arguments.
So let me tell you one problem that I'm facing. So So I came here, and then one of the things I was told is like, Prof, don't worry, UCT has transformed, there's a lot of students who are designated black, and we've done this work all these years. Even amongst the staff, there's a lot of progress. We are working on this. Yes, we've got challenges, but we are working on it. And I was like, yeah, no, we read about it in the papers. When you sneeze, it's in the news. There's been a lot of things written about you over the last 3 years, 4 years about transformation, and also the fact that you don't want transformation and all of that. And they're like, no. It's not like that. And they started showing me that efforts around transformation go back, I would say, when you were involved, there was a lot of transformation that took place. But what shocked me was the fact that what we are actually seeing is efforts that started during Stuart Saunders' time. Maybe not started there, but really picked up speed at that time. And this is like going back now to the 80s. Mm-hmm. And speaking to people like Mampela Rampela also spoke about, the tension that existed between 96 and 99 during a whole lot of discussions around transformation, and Jabulani Ndebele also just kind of coming in for like a healing hand. But it sounds to me like transformation has been happening for a long time. But with that, now I've got a problem. Let's hold him to account. We've got a lot of students who, I think it's a good thing, who are smart, very intelligent, who are from underprivileged backgrounds. Many of them are NSFAS funded. They're now studying at UCT, who would in the past not be able to get into UCT, not even afford. But because of that, there's also issues in the sense that Cape Town is very expensive, I've come to realize. Rondebosch in particular, I don't know why. But NSFAS would grant a student 50,000 or 55,000, say, for accommodation. But the accommodation cost there will start from 65,000, 70, 80, 90, up to 120,000. Decent accommodation that needs to meet the needs that a student will have, to have catering, to have meals, have internet, within the transport routes for the shuttles and all of that. But these students are left with a gap. If they're given 55,000 and the accommodation is 90,000, then they've got 35,000 that they owe us. And they can't afford to pay it because they're coming from underprivileged backgrounds. Now, can I blame these students if they say, actually, fees must fall? You brought them into the institution, rightly so. But now, the environment that you brought them into makes it very difficult. In fact, the fact that I have to send them a letter, we sent them letters 2-3 weeks ago, telling them that they are owing, they must pay up. Otherwise, that stresses them. It's exam time, they're supposed to study. Chances are they may struggle to study and end up not performing well. We could set them up for failure in so doing. So then when they now go on strike in January, when they go on strike in January, what am I going to tell them? Vice-Chancellor?
Well, As you said, fortunately, I'm not in that hot seat. But I think that to say that this is exactly the problem we faced with Fees Must Fall.
Right.
It's and the huge disappointment is that we largely addressed it as a result of Fees Must Fall with government. In other words, government put a freeze on increases for people below a certain income, the people who are eligible for NSFAS. They also extended financial aid to the missing middle to a certain extent, not enough, but they certainly. And it looked in 2017 at the end of the Fees Must Fall protests like someone in government, the minister, had understood the problem, that you can't put the vice-chancellors in the university and the students between that rock and a hard place where you tell them to admit more students, but you don't give them funding to pay for those students, either directly in the form of block grants or indirectly through NSFAS. And then, on top of that, you've had the mess up of administration in NSFAS and some corruption, and so that even the money that's there doesn't seem to be reaching all of its targets. So it needs, and I hope there's a new minister. I hope that the Vice-Chancellor, because this isn't just a UCT problem, of course it's everywhere.
Oh, but it's worse in Cape Town. I mean,
It's,
in other towns,
Well,
accommodation may not be as expensive as it is in Rondebosch.
yeah, that part's true, but I mean, not that I want to diminish your burden.
My troubles.
Your troubles. But the advantage we have at UCT, and at Wits to a significant extent, and at Stellenbosch, is that about half of our students can afford the full fees, and including the accommodation as well as tuition. And in fact, we had designed, I can't say what it is 5 years, 6 years later, but we had designed a system which generated a cross-subsidy from full fee paying students to the financial aid students. And it was covering part of that residence fee as well. So if the residence was at that time 60, 70,000, and NSFAS was only paying 50, we were able to cross-subsidize the extra 20 from the full fee paying students. Most universities in the country have less than 5% full fee paying students. In other words, they don't have any opportunity for that cross subsidy. And so, in fact, UCT and Wits and the historically white universities are in a better position than the others. That doesn't take away the problem altogether, not at all, because as you say, there's a limit to which you can tax those students, the full fee paying students. And we've probably reached that limit because it's becoming so expensive. And there's also it's also the balance. So if you've got 70% full fee paying and 30% subsidized, you can do the cross subsidy. But if it goes the other way, and you now have 70% financial aid students, you don't have enough out of the full fee paying students to do the cross subsidy. So it's a problem that gets worse year on year.
So you were gaming it, basically.
We were. We were solving it. But we were solving it, but it was a temporary solution.
COVID came.
And that was after me, yeah.
COVID came.
You can't blame me for COVID.
Are you ready for questions?
Yes, okay, let me finish. COVID came, and when COVID came, now for 4 years, we've been having a budget deficit at UCT. Mm. This is the 4th year. We are projecting a budget deficit next year as well. And so this is the problem that I'm settled with. And I don't know why I was not told all of these things before I took the job. Can I ask him one last question?
Huh?
Yeah, one last question. The unions are here. I saw some of them walk into the room. I want to ask you about insourcing. This is another issue that I'm settled with, right? That I have to manage. I was shocked. I tried to look into this issue and I realized that actually I have to trace it back to Mampela Rampela's time. You see, people make decisions that we have to deal with today, ages ago. So, and they decided what they decided to make sure that they are outsourcing all of the services. And I understood the reasons based on the finances and the kind of situation that I'm in. I'm not saying that I'm considering outsourcing all of the services. The EU is here. But it's a real tension, and I'd like you to tell me how you thought about this, because part of it is trying to solve and to be just. You know, it's a socially just intervention when you insource, on the one hand. But on the other hand, it settles you with a huge bill of the staffing costs. And when your budget is great and shiny and all of that, okay, maybe you can. But when you are now dealing with a very tight budget, it's hard. Can you comment on that one?
I can. In some ways, so I suppose everyone here knows that one of the, so that we insourced most of the outsourced workers. Moshabela outsourced a whole lot of services in the late 90s. And in 2016, we insourced those services. So we reversed the outsourcing. And I don't know if there's time really to unpack the arguments, but I'm just going to focus on one of the arguments. And one of the arguments relates to this idea that I highlighted before of the tension between creating an inclusive community and the diversity of that community as well. We found ourselves in a situation which happens with insourcing, that you have people who are cleaning the residences and catering in the residences, who are in daily contact with the students, who are often almost providing surrogate mothers and parents to the students, because the students often turn to them for support and help when they're away, they don't have families around. People working in the departments who might be doing photocopying or might be making tea as well as doing the cleaning. The people driving the buses, the people who are in security, who most visitors approach them first and say, where do I go to find the engineering building? And yet these people were being required to wear other uniforms, the uniforms of G4S or the uniforms of FedEx. They were not being given the benefits that other staff had. They were being told, you are not UCT. You belong to that company that does the driving or that company that does the thing. In other words, it was firstly a structure of an organization which was fundamentally divisive. It was certainly the opposite of inclusive and cohesive. So that's the first point to make, just to link it to that theme. The second was that the outsourcing in South Africa, and it's not everywhere in the world, allows hyper-exploitation of wages because there's so much job insecurity. The workers in those companies are only employed as long as that company has the contract with UCT. And if it goes out to tender after 5 years and we replace the catering company with a different company, then those workers could all lose their jobs. So they have no job security. That also means that they can't really unionize effectively. They can't protect their rights. So there's a whole lot of consequence of that. And we felt that the injustice of that, the inequality of incomes that resulted in, and the divisiveness or the lack of a sense of we're one organization that works together were the reasons for insourcing. But to counter your one comment about how much this is costing UCT, it is the case that it's cost us more because salaries were lower, but it didn't cost us nearly as much as you might think, because over the 15 years that the workers had been outsourced, those employees had been outsourced, UCT had already been very concerned about the exploitation on salaries. And so we had introduced what we called a supplemental salary level. This was a level that companies that wanted to work at UCT had to set a minimum wage, which was not the national sector minimum wage, but was a minimum wage that we specified. And that minimum wage was roughly 100% higher than the minimum wage in the country, the sectoral minimum wage. So by the time we re-insourced those workers, they were already earning roughly 70 to 80% of the salary that they would earn in UCT, and so the increase we had to pay was not as great. It was in 2015.
Do you want me to show you?
In 2018, it was around 60 million.
My stuffing costs?
Oh, no.
Before you get started, I'm going to open the floor to questions. So we do have time for a few questions. I'm going to take a couple, and then if you can take some notes, I'll come back to you. So let's take you on the right-hand side there. And not. And at the back there.
Can you go to the end if you can?
Hello everyone, my
Hi.
name is Samuel and I'm a student in university. And I have a question, I think for both of you guys, I mean, given this experience and what you have been finding in the field, engaging with these stakeholders. You've spoken about a legacy and a foundation that has been established and that we have inherited. So how do the constituent parts of this institution sort of envision the future of the university? And what are their aspirations? I mean, what have you observed? I mean, to be specific about the expression of each constituent part. And I ask this because Council is currently piloting a University of the Future project. Nelson Mandela Memorial Center is sort of public governance, right? And so you're projecting yourselves into the future here. So how do these stakeholders project the university into the future? Who is included in this projection? And what are the priorities
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's hand over to the person next to you, and then there is something at the back. Let's go to you next, and then we'll come back to the speakers.
Well, thank you to the current Vice-Chancellor, to Dr. Price. I think the first thing that we have to appreciate is that the university did not make this decision on its own will. And I think that Dr. Price was the honest here. People were forced to make this kind of decision under a particular environment or context from experience, to a point that the university even jailed some of us also. So it is not necessarily a mambo jumbo that we are all able to make this kind of decisions. And secondly, in thinking about the question of race in South Africa and in the university, I've often wondered that the 70% that Dr. Price speaks about, which pays for all of its fees, and 30% which cannot pay for its fees. In what way does it maintain the notion that we can have a minority in the country being a majority in the university in Africa, and still have a majority in the country being a minority in its own indigenous? How do you wrestle with those contradictions of race? So that's my short question. Also, I wanted to quote the rest of that book.
Okay, let's take one more in the back.
There's also.
I'm not sure I understood that question.
I'll answer it.
Thanks a lot to both the current VC and the former VC. I just want to maybe just pick up on Mascole's question and his colleague next to him briefly. It is without any doubt that 2015 was indeed a very interesting, I think, period in the life of the university. Some of us were here. We co-founders of Rhodes Must Fall. We were there when it started. We were there when all the issues around, insourcing, outsourcing, and all of those arguments where all of those questions were raised to Dr. Max Price at the time. And I'm a bit concerned about the lives of students the students whose lives today, a majority of them who couldn't finish because of the decisions that were taken by Max Price and his executive, which led to some of those students being short-handed, some of them being expelled, And some of them, as Makola was saying, were basically jailed, sent to Portsmouth, where they could face the harshness of time, the experience. Now, the issue for me is that, with the benefit of hindsight, understanding, the period 2015, 9 years later, Rhodes Must Fall next year will be celebrating or commemorating, its 10th anniversary. And I'm a bit concerned about the fact that, the book doesn't seem to say much about how those students were affected by the decisions that were taken by the university. And what is the responsibility of the university to make a follow-up on the lives of those students because of the following reason. Rhodes Must Fall had raised very important questions. And I think that Dr. Max Price he agrees with us when we argue that these are the questions that have today shaped, at least to some degree, the thinking of the university. And it does, concur with the argument that these were important questions, and these are the questions that have basically, assisted the university to think of itself anew in the changing socio-political dynamic of the country. Now, with people who were involved in that process, to a large extent, they assisted the university. They assisted the university to face its own arguments. And today, some of those students couldn't finish, their studies because of the decisions that were taken by the university. And the question now is, with the benefit now of that hindsight, would you agree with the sentiment that even though the statue of Rhodes, may have fallen, but it seems to me that there are many roads that still need to fall within the university because of the same circumstances that we fought against in 2015, 2016. If you talk of your Sheffield TRC that took place in 2016, if we just skip further, issues of exclusion, issues of institutionalized racism, issues of black lecturers and black staff who don't feel part and parcel of the university because of some nuances that have been spoken to here. Now the question is what then should be that approach? I think the current VC was trying to get the sense from you because you were here at the university and then you took certain decisions, and those decisions have led to some of the complexities that I think we have to deal with still today.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've got the gist of your question. Thank you very much. I think we've all got that.
Yeah,
We wanted one more.
Just take one more. It's a question.
Okay, let's take your question and we'll... That's
My
right?
question.
Yeah.
So
We can hear.
Is on the one side we're dealing with economic issues, on the other side we're dealing with political philosophy. And to what extent do you find the balance between, say, a political philosophy of, say, Frans Fanon and how that is taught at the university versus the basics of how do we survive and create a future from an economic point of view?
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Mosa.
Yeah, so thank you for those questions. I'm going to leave most of them for Max. Yeah. But I think your question about how we envision the future is important. There are certain things that shape how we envision the future. When I arrived at UCT, what I found was something called the Financial Sustainability Plan. I don't know how many people know about this, but it was a response of the university to the budget deficit post-COVID-19, some of the financial problems that the university is having, and they're trying to figure out how to move forward and make sure that the university has got surplus as it used to have, and therefore can have enough money to do other interesting things. The lens through which the future was envisioned in that program was through a financial lens, because the university wants to solve a particular problem. You mentioned the University of the Future. The University of the Future started with environmental sustainability as the lens. But it shifted and it ended up becoming more of an academic lens because they did all the surveys and engaged with a lot of stakeholders. And so now we're at a point where I'm saying to them, how do we make the effort around the future of the university broader than just the financial lens and also just the environment and just some of the academic programs that they are talking about? And that's the work that we are doing to try and bring the different. So this is another thing about that I found at UCT. I'm not complaining. There's a lot of fragmentation, parallel movements. A lot of people trying to go towards the same direction, but coming at it from different angles and not talking to each other. So now trying to get them to come together and converge. It's like herding cats because everybody has their own authority and power. We are devolved. Everybody needs the space to make their decisions, but we have to get UCT to coordinate efforts. It's inefficient, and in fact, it just paralyzes the system if we don't bring all of those people who are trying to solve the problem from different angles, the same problem from different angles. They need to work together. Now, trying to get people who think differently to work together requires a different kind of tactical skill. You know, we talk of consensus building and other things. It requires a different kind of. So we are working on that to try and do that. I am hoping that we can envision the university from different angles, from people and culture and talent, from financial, from academic excellence, from diversity and inclusion, from sustainability. I'm hoping that we can do that. And they've given us a 360-degree value-add framework that we're going to be using to do that. And I hope that will address your concern. And it'll cater for the different innovations that will be happening in different spaces. I just want to answer the one about economic issues versus political. I came here, and of course I was confronted with the Gaza resolutions. I had nothing to do with this. And I got here, and that was the first thing I got. The first day I got into my job, I got a letter from the donor said, your resolutions, we don't want to give you money anymore. It's like, what did I do? On the 1st of August. And that was just the beginning. Since then, I have met with a whole range of stakeholders to discuss this issue. And I've learned a lot in the process. But it was at one faculty board, I won't mention which faculty, where I discovered that when I framed the problem for them, they began to understand the tension. Because I had been engaging with colleagues and thinking about it. I was like, there's this tension between what people consider academic freedom, which is the core ethos of UCT, with social justice. Other people call it social accountability and other versions. There's this tension. Where I come from, there's no tension between those things. There's no tension. They flow into each other seamlessly. But here, they create a tension. And those who are defending the one argument, it's almost as if they're opposed to the other. But when you pin them down and you ask them, are you really against this? Like, no, I'm not against it. They're not completely against social accountability. But the way they frame their arguments around academic freedom makes them come across as if they are. The other ones who are social justice, social accountability, when you pin them down, they are not opposed to academic freedom. They value it. They uphold it. They live it. But then, why is there a problem? Our problem is socially constructed. But it's dividing us. It's dividing us. So it's one of the things that I posed to the College of Fellows. We had a meeting today, a 2-hour session, where we debated around these issues to say, why are we creating a tension? Because now we are dividing an institution. Several constituencies now have to decide which side they're going to take. And now he's asking me to build consensus. So we've got to address that point, recognizing that we create dichotomies and binaries on things that are not binary. There's a whole spectrum. These things are fluid, and we have to allow them to flow into each other. Just because we are divided, we must not then divide these things up. Let's deal with our divisions so that we can get on with the academic project within which these issues are not in tension. We are the ones who are in tension. Let's sort out our differences.
Do you want to keep it brief?
No. Okay, well, I'm going to sort of combine the last. I think I won't. I think the first speaker was Mzamo. Is that right? I don't know if I got the name. I'm going to then leave that because I think that the Vice-Chancellor addressed a lot of those points. And the second and third questions, in a way, they overlap a lot. So the first point Masikwale made was that one should acknowledge, that I should acknowledge, but I know you say you want me to give you the book, but please read it, because I think I acknowledge over and over that many of the changes would not have come if it hadn't have been for the protests that pushed the institution, me, other people across the country to that point of making certain concessions. But I don't think that's true, firstly with respect to the Rhodes Must Fall issue. As I said, the executive of the university supported the call. In fact, we had even suggested it before the protest started in the preceding year, and we had initiated a survey. So some of the changes may have been accelerated. I think that the consensus that was built was very much driven by the protests to take down the statue. But I also want to make the point that during almost the whole of 2015, which was the year of the Rhodes Must Fall in the beginning and the first phase of Fees Must Fall at the end, we did not lose during Rhodes Must Fall a single day of lectures. There was no disruption. There were no barricades. It was a well-orchestrated but peaceful protest, and no one was imprisoned, no one was disciplined around the Rhodes Must Fall scenario, or that period, and the achievement of the statue coming down. The question about, should we be concerned, and how concerned should we be about students whose lives were damaged and compromised as a result of I think what you're saying, as a result of the actions of the university against them, or maybe of the police against them. There are really a very, very small number. If it's 10, it's a lot of people who were either disciplined in the end to the point where they were, for example, expelled or rusticated, or had some criminal charges successfully pursued against them. On the other hand, I do think there are also hundreds, if not thousands, of students who were traumatized and staff members by the protests themselves when they became violent and disruptive, which was really in the second year, in 2016 primarily. And I think the point is that I do not believe that was necessary to achieve the goals that were achieved around Fees Must Fall or Rhodes Must Fall. Rhodes Must Fall was achieved without that sort of disruption and without violence, and there was a willingness on the part of most of the stakeholders to listen and to find a way forward, as there was around the first phase of Fees Must Fall. And when you have, as I describe in the book, in my view, the sort of umbrella or the agglomeration of fallist movements, which covered gender, covered disability, included mental health, included people with financial exclusions, included accommodation issues. So many students, or many student groupings with different kinds of challenges and grievances and obstacles came together under the Fallist movement. We were able to address almost all of them, and we were able to do that without the need for disruption that would affect the whole student body. But there was also a group within that whose goal was not to achieve any of those legitimate goals, but whose goal was to try to almost to destroy the university, to bring the university down, and that links to the sort of one version of the Fanonist view, which is that you don't really get decolonization until you first destroy the system, and that often requires violence. There was a cluster within that for whom no concessions, no change in policy would have been sufficient or would have satisfied the need. Their goal was the violence. That was an end in itself, and doing damage to the university was an end in itself. Now that group could not be appeased. There could be no solution for that group. What we had to do as an executive, our strategy had to be to strip away all the other groups so that instead of having several thousand students supporting that protest, it was reduced to maybe 100 to 200. And then we had to manage that 100 or 200 with the coercive measures that were necessary, with interdicts, with detentions, with disciplinary action. Although the number of people in the end who remained was a very small core, as I say, probably 10. And in my view, those people have to be held accountable for their actions. I don't think that there should be an environment of impunity, and I don't apologize for that. So I'm not on the same page as you are in respect of feeling that some sort of reparation or something is required or apology to that remaining group. The question that you then went on to ask, which is, what has happened since, and is the environment any different? I mean, I can't speak for that. I don't know today how black students and black staff are feeling in the university. What we did at the time was to do these so-called institutional culture surveys, and we did 3 during my 10 years at 4-year intervals. If one hasn't been done, I think it would be a good idea to use that supplemented by sort of focus groups and other things to try to understand what is the experience of black students and staff. I can't answer that. And if there are, to the extent there must be still problems, I mean, these things are not, it's always a process. To the extent that there are still those experiences of not being included or of being othered, the university needs to address, the executive and the deans and the heads of departments need to address that. And I'm sure they will. I don't see why they would resist it. We want it to be an inclusive space.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very good note to end. I'd like to thank most warmly our 2 conversationalists for, I think, what has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks to the audience for your participation. Thanks to the organizers. And please feel free to socialize afterwards, and I'm sure the conversation...
They can come and sign the books for anyone who wants.
And Dr. Price will be signing the book.
They can also come down for questions.
And you can come down here for questions.
Okay.